The ground seemed to come alive, a dark, undulating carpet suddenly spreading outward from the cave entrance. It took the hikers several horrified seconds to realize they were looking at millions of tiny spiders, each no bigger than a fingernail, moving as one seething mass across the forest floor. "Nobody move," a calm voice commanded, cutting through the rising panic. The 24 hikers who had been enjoying Yellowstone National Park's Hidden Valley Trail froze in place. Their planned autumn hike transformed into a nightmare scenario. What had started as an exciting discovery, a newly exposed cave entrance revealed by recent geological activity, had turned into something out of a horror film as a disturbed cavern released its ancient inhabitants. The spiders moved with alarming speed, already covering 50 yards of the trail, and climbing up tree trunks, rocks, and low vegetation. The normal evacuation route back to the ranger station was now completely blocked, and the steep canyon walls on either side offered no escape. The only functioning radio, carried by the group's guide, could barely send a distress signal through the terrain, with rangers estimating 6 hours before rescue teams could arrive. Richard Hartman had been the quiet, elderly man at the back of the group. At 70, with his weathered face and unassuming khaki hiking clothes, most had assumed he was just another retiree enjoying the national parks. Only the tour guide had noticed his perfect posture and keen observational habits. Now, as the group's guide looked on with increasing desperation, Richard stepped forward, his eyes methodically scanning the environment. 25 years in Army jungle operations, he said simply, introducing himself to the frightened group. "I've seen something similar in Vietnam. Everyone stay calm and listen carefully. We can get through this." Richard crouched at the edge of a boulder, studying the spider's movement patterns. His eyes, still sharp despite his age, noted the distinctive markings and behaviors of the arachnids. "Ancient species, possibly prehistoric wolf spiders," he observed, speaking to Karen, the tour guide. "Look at their formation. They're moving in coordinated waves, not random patterns. This isn't normal behavior." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. 2 hikers, a teenage boy and an older woman, had developed angry red welts where spiders had crawled across their ankles. A biologist in the group confirmed Richard's assessment that these appeared to be a species thought long extinct, possibly awakened from dormant eggs by the recent seismic activity that had revealed the cave. Karen's radio crackled with a response from the ranger station. Rescue team mobilizing, but helicopter access impossible due to the narrow canyon. Ground team ETA minimum 6 hours. Richard processed this information with the calm assessment of a veteran who had faced far worse conditions. His mind flashed back to the monsoon seasons in Vietnam, where his unit had encountered similar arthropod swarms after heavy flooding drove creatures from their subterranean habitats. Later, as a survival instructor, he had taught soldiers how to handle wildlife threats in hostile environments. "We can't go back, can't stay here, and we can't wait 6 hours," Richard stated matter-of-factly. "Those with allergic reactions need medical attention sooner, and the spiders are multiplying. Look there," he pointed to the cave entrance where more continued to emerge. "They're still coming." Several hikers began to panic, suggesting desperate measures like attempting to scale the slippery canyon walls or making a run through the spider mass. Richard's authoritative voice cut through the chaos. "That's how people die," he said firmly. "Panic is as dangerous as a threat." Richard began methodically assessing their available resources, a skill honed through decades of military service. He instructed everyone to empty their backpacks, creating an inventory: water bottles, trail mix, first aid kits, rain gear, maps, lighters, pocket knives, and various personal items. Next, he surveyed the natural resources around them, specific plants, soil types, and terrain features. He asked each hiker about their professional backgrounds and physical capabilities, mentally forming specialized teams as he had done countless times in combat situations. "In the jungle, we learned to work with nature, not against it," Richard explained to the group. "These spiders have weaknesses, sensitivities to certain smells, vibrations, and environmental factors. We'll exploit those." As he spoke, the 2 affected hikers began showing more severe symptoms: dizziness and respiratory difficulty. There was no time for elaborate planning or waiting for official rescue. "We have one viable route," Richard announced, pointing to a narrow passage through the canyon that seemed less infested. "But we'll need protection and a strategy. Everyone listen carefully. Your lives depend on following instructions exactly as I give them." Richard's mind flashed back to 1971, deep in the Vietnamese highlands, where his unit had encountered a similar phenomenon during the monsoon season. His platoon had been trapped for 3 days, forced to adapt to the sudden arthropod invasion. Later, as part of special jungle warfare training development, he had worked with entomologists to establish protocols for such situations. "We need 3 things." Richard addressed the group with the practiced briefing tone of a military officer: repellent, protective covering, and a secure movement formation. He immediately organized the hikers into functional teams based on their skills. A chemistry teacher and a gardening enthusiast were tasked with creating a natural repellent under Richard's direction. Wild garlic, juniper berries, and white clay soil, he instructed, pointing out the plants growing nearby. Crush them together. Mix with a small amount of water. The compounds create an odor that disrupts their sensing organs. While they worked, Richard had others prepare improvised protective gear from available materials. Rain ponchos were modified to cover exposed skin, secured with duct tape from a hiker's emergency kit. Socks were pulled over hands and secured at wrists. He demonstrated a military technique for sealing clothing, a method developed for jungle warfare to prevent insect infiltration. In survival situations, perception is as important as physical protection, Richard explained, his voice steady and instructional. Spiders sense vibration and chemical signatures. Control your breathing, move deliberately, and maintain formation, just like we did on night patrols through enemy territory. Using a stick, Richard drew a map in the soil, applying the same terrain analysis techniques that had kept the soldiers alive in hostile environments. He identified a path of least resistance, a slightly elevated ridge where water runoff had washed away the soil, making it less attractive to the ground-dwelling spiders. "Notice their movement patterns," he pointed out. "They avoid certain soil types and are concentrated in areas with specific vegetation. We'll use that knowledge to navigate." Richard then established a military-style communication system, teaching the group simple hand signals and commands that would allow silent coordination. In the jungle, noise attracts predators. Here, excessive vibration will draw more spiders. As the natural repellent was completed, Richard demonstrated its application, focusing on boot areas, pant cuffs, and wrists, knowledge gained from years of jungle operations. "Apply it like camouflage paint," he instructed, showing precise technique. "Concentrated at entry points, thinner layer elsewhere." For the 2 hikers suffering allergic reactions, Richard improvised antihistamine administration, using crushed allergy medication another hiker had in their personal kit, dissolved in water, a battlefield medical technique for when standard delivery methods weren't available. Before beginning their evacuation, Richard organized the group into a modified diamond formation, a tactical arrangement he had used for moving injured personnel through hostile territory. "Strongest individuals at perimeter points," he directed. "Those with hiking poles use them to clear the path ahead. Affected individuals in the protected center. Maintain arm's length distance. Close enough for support, far enough to avoid crowding." Richard taught them a synchronized stepping pattern that minimized ground disturbance, a technique developed for moving through areas with pressure-sensitive explosive devices, but equally effective for minimizing vibrations that attracted the spiders. "Step, scan, secure," he instructed, just like we taught new recruits. "Your lives depend on discipline and attention now, not speed." As they prepared to move out, several hikers looked skeptical about taking orders from a 70-year-old man. Richard simply continued his preparations with quiet confidence. "Age is just a number," he commented to Karen. "In the field, experience outweighs everything else. These spiders may be millions of years old, but so are the survival instincts I'm going to activate in these people." 3 hours into their carefully planned evacuation, the group faced their greatest challenge. The narrow ridge they had been following terminated at a bottleneck, a passage barely 6 feet wide between 2 rock faces, its ground completely covered with writhing mass of spiders. Beyond lay the ranger station access trail, but this choke point seemed impassable. The group halted as Richard assessed the situation. The allergic reactions in the affected hikers were worsening despite the improvised treatments, and daylight was beginning to fade. Waiting was not an option. "We need a diversion and a barrier," Richard announced, his mind calculating options with the precision of a combat veteran. He recalled a technique used in Southeast Asia where his unit had created safe passages through leech-infested waters. "Everyone, gather all remaining repellent," he instructed. "We'll create a concentrated channel through the center." Working methodically, Richard demonstrated how to mix the remaining repellent with soil to create a more durable compound. He then showed them how to apply it in 2 parallel lines, forming a pathway through the spider-covered ground. "In jungle warfare, we learned that sometimes you must move to the threat, not around it," he explained. Before allowing anyone else to test the path, Richard insisted on going first, the same principle of leadership he had followed throughout his military career. "I'll establish the route's viability," he stated firmly when others protested. Applying extra repellent to his boots and pant legs, Richard began carefully navigating the narrow path they had created. Several spiders still climbed onto his boots, and a few managed to bypass the repellent altogether, biting through his thin hiking pants. Despite the pain, Richard maintained his composure, calmly brushing them away while continuing forward. Halfway through, a section of the barrier began to fail as the spiders surged around it. Without hesitation, Richard used his own walking stick and jacket to reinforce a protective corridor, deliberately drawing the spiders toward himself and away from the path the others would take. 16-year-old Emma, the younger of the two with severe reactions, was now struggling to breathe. Richard made an immediate decision, removing a protective outer layer and wrapping it completely around the girl before instructing her father how to carry her through the passage. "Keep her elevated. Move steadily. Don't rush," he directed with the calm precision of a medic who had evacuated wounded under fire. As the hikers began moving through the narrow corridor one by one, Richard positioned himself at the most vulnerable point, continuously reinforcing the barrier and drawing spiders away from the passage. Several more spiders bit him, but he maintained his position until the last hiker had passed. The final crossing required the group to implement what Richard called a tactical evacuation line, essentially a human chain that maintained formation integrity even when individual members were under duress. This technique, developed for evacuating wounded under enemy fire, proved perfectly adapted to their current crisis. "Focus forward, not down," Richard instructed as several hikers froze at the sight of the seething mass around them. "Trust the formation, trust the training. This is how military units survive when everything else fails." As the last hiker cleared the bottleneck, Richard quickly caught up with the group despite his numerous spider bites. He refused to slow their pace until they reached the main trail junction where, remarkably, they encountered the advanced team of park rangers coming to their rescue. The medical technicians immediately administered proper treatment to Emma and the other affected hiker, while also attending to Richard's multiple bites. One paramedic remarked that without Richard's improvised antihistamine administration, Emma's reaction could have been life-threatening. "Your quick actions save her from anaphylactic shock," the paramedic told Richard. "Where did you learn emergency field treatment like that?" 25th Infantry, Vietnam," Richard replied simply. "When proper medical evacuation isn't available, you adapt." The park rangers were astounded by the group's organized arrival, and even more shocked when they learned about the ancient spider emergence. The lead ranger, a veteran herself, recognized the military precision in how the hikers had been organized. "You implemented better protocols and our own emergency procedures," she admitted to Richard. As the group recovered at the ranger station, Richard reflected on how his military training, skills he hadn't actively used in combat for decades, had remained sharp and applicable. Perhaps, he thought, this was the enduring gift of military service, preparation that continues to serve society long after the uniform is put away. The discipline, resourcefulness, and calm under pressure that had been drilled into him as a young man had saved lives today in a scenario no one could have predicted. In the following days, as biologists descended on Yellowstone to study what was confirmed to be a previously extinct species of wolf spider that had somehow survived in suspended animation, Richard quietly declined interviews and photo opportunities. When the park superintendent personally thanked him and asked what protocols he would recommend for similar incidents, Richard spent an afternoon outlining a comprehensive emergency response plan based on his military experience. Many of his suggestions were immediately adopted into the park's standard procedures. At a small gathering organized by the hiking group before they departed, Emma's father raised a toast to Richard. Most people see a retiree when they look at Richard, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But today we saw what military training really means, not just in war, but in life. His calmness under pressure and lifetime of preparation saved my daughter and all of us. Richard responded with the humble perspective of a lifelong soldier. The skills I use today weren't extraordinary. They're taught to thousands of service members. Veterans carry these abilities into civilian life every day, often unnoticed until a crisis reveals them. Have you ever encountered someone whose military experience made a difference in an unexpected situation? Richard asked the group. These stories deserve to be shared. Perhaps there's a veteran in your community whose training has benefited others in ways you might not even recognize. Take a moment to appreciate how military training continues to protect and serve long after veterans return home. As the group nodded in agreement, Richard realized that perhaps his greatest service wasn't just the lives he'd saved today, but the reminder that veterans remain a vital, powerful resource in our communities. Their experiences and training continue to protect us in ways we rarely see until moments of crisis reveal their true value.